Family left Obese daughter for dead. Mountain man found her and married her before sunset. Left alone in the snow by the very people who should have protected her, a young woman clutches a thin blanket, wolves howling in the distance. Just when death seems certain, a rugged mountain man steps from the pines, rifle in hand, coat on his shoulders, eyes full of grit and mercy. But his rescue is only the beginning. Before the sun goes down, he shocks the whole town with a vow no one expected. Yet whispers rise, threats burn, and secrets buried in old treaties promise a battle that could cost them everything. Neighbors scorn her, railroad men circle like vultures, and danger waits beyond every snow-choked ridge. How could a woman once cast aside become the one to save them all? And when the fire of greed meets the courage of the forgotten, whose strength will carry the day? Your comments remind me that we're not alone in feeling deeply. If loyalty, second chances, and human dignity mean something to you, then you're right where you belong. The winter morning bit deep into Samantha's bones as she watched the Mayfield wagon train make camp in the snow-dusted pine clearing. Her family's wagon, weathered and creaking, settled into place alongside the others. The smell of coffee and salt pork drifted through the crisp air as breakfast fires sparked to life. Samantha's stomach twisted with more than just hunger as she caught fragments of conversation from where her father and brothers huddled near the fire. Their voices carried on the still morning air, sharp as icicles. "Slowing us down something awful," her eldest brother muttered, casting a dark glance her way. "Eating more than her share, too," added Thomas, the middle brother. "Stores won't last to Oregon at this rate." Her father's response was too low to hear, but his grim nod told Samantha all she needed to know. She'd seen that look before, the same one he'd worn when they'd had to shoot their lame horse last spring. When time came to move out, Samantha struggled to her feet, her cold, numbed legs protesting. The wagon's step seemed higher than usual, the distance to climb impossibly far. "Get a move on, girl," her father barked. "Daylight's wasting." But her fingers, stiff with cold, couldn't find purchase on the frozen wood. She slipped, landing hard in the snow. Pain shot through her hip. Without a word, her father flicked the reins. The wagon lurched forward, leaving Samantha sprawled in the clearing with nothing but the thin blanket that had fallen from her shoulders. "Wait!" she called out, voice cracking. "Please!" But the wagon train was already moving, wheels crunching through fresh snow. Samantha struggled to her feet, limping after the disappearing wagons. Her breath came in panicked gasps, forming clouds in the frigid air. But it was no use. The wagons vanished around a bend in the timber road, leaving only silence and swirling snowflakes in their wake. The reality of her situation crashed over her like an icy wave. She was alone, abandoned, left to die by her own flesh and blood. Samantha stumbled to the nearest pine tree, her legs giving out beneath her. She pulled the thin blanket tight around her shoulders, though it did little to ward off the deepening cold. The rough bark pressed against her back as she huddled there, trying to make herself as small as possible, though she knew well enough that had always been impossible. "Dear Lord," she whispered, her voice trembling, "please don't let me die out here. Please." The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. The weak winter sun offered little warmth as it tracked across the sky. Samantha's stomach cramped with hunger. She hadn't eaten since the previous evening, and even that had been just a few scraps of hardtack. She tried to stand several times, thinking to follow the wagon tracks, but the cold had settled deep in her bones. Each attempt left her gasping and shaking, slumping back against the tree trunk in defeat. As afternoon faded toward evening, the temperature plummeted further. Frost formed on Samantha's eyelashes and crusted the edges of her blanket. Her fingers had long since gone numb, and she could no longer feel her feet in her worn boots. The first howl echoed through the gathering dusk, raising the hair on the back of her neck. Another answered, closer, and then another. Wolves, hunting in the winter twilight. Samantha squeezed her eyes shut, tears freezing on her cheeks. This was how it would end then, alone in the snow, torn apart by wolves, or simply freezing to death in the night. Perhaps it was fitting. She'd always been a burden, hadn't she? That's what they'd all said, what they'd always believed. The cold was seeping deeper now, and with it came an insidious drowsiness. Samantha knew she shouldn't sleep, that sleeping in such cold meant death. But her limbs felt so heavy, her mind growing fuzzy around the edges. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though she wasn't sure to whom. To God, to her family, to herself. "I'm so sorry." The wolves called again, their voices carrying clearly through the still evening air. They were closer now, much closer. Samantha's heart fluttered weakly in her chest as darkness gathered thick beneath the pines. She thought of her mother, gone these past 5 years. Would she be waiting? There in heaven? Would she at least welcome her daughter home, even if no one else had wanted her? The last rays of daylight faded from the sky. Samantha's chin dropped to her chest as consciousness began to slip away. The wolves' howls seemed distant now, unimportant. Everything was growing dim, peaceful almost. She closed her eyes, certain that death was near, and surrendered to the encroaching darkness. Manuel Hartwell shifted his rifle across his shoulder as he tracked elk prints through the deepening snow. The marks were fresh, no more than an hour old, and his experienced eye could read the story they told. A small herd, moving south toward better grazing, had passed through recently. His hound, Scout, trotted ahead, nose working the cold air. The dog's sudden bark pierced the twilight, making Manuel pause. That wasn't Scout's elk bark. This was different, urgent. "¿Qué pasa, amigo?" Manuel murmured, watching as Scout's tail went rigid. The dog's head snapped around, dark eyes fixed on something to the west. Without warning, Scout bounded off through the trees, leaving Manuel to follow through the knee-deep snow. The wolves' howls reached his ears then, too close for comfort. Manuel quickened his pace, boots crunching through the crusty surface. Scout's excited barking led him around a thick stand of pines, and there he stopped short, breath catching in his throat. A figure huddled against a massive pine trunk, nearly buried in fresh snow. At first, Manuel thought he'd found a corpse. It wouldn't be the first time the winter had claimed someone in these mountains. But as he drew closer, a faint puff of breath clouded the air before the woman's blue-tinged lips. "Madre de Dios," he breathed, dropping to his knees beside her. She was young, maybe 20 years old, with a face that might have been pretty if it weren't so drawn with cold and hunger. A threadbare blanket offered little protection against the killing frost. Manuel pressed 2 fingers to her neck, feeling a weak pulse flutter beneath ice-cold skin. She was alive. Barely. Without hesitation, he shrugged off his bearskin cloak and wrapped it around her still form. The wolves called again, closer now, making Scout growl low in his throat. "Keep watch," Manuel ordered the dog. He needed to work fast. Years of wilderness living had taught him efficiency. Within minutes, he had a fire blazing, built against the trunk of a fallen pine that would reflect the heat back toward them. He propped the girl closer to the flames, supporting her limp body with his own. From his pack, he pulled a tin pot and filled it with snow to melt. When it was hot enough, he added dried meat and herbs to make a simple broth. The girl's head lolled against his shoulder as he held the tin to her lips. "Drink," he urged softly, his accent rolling the R slightly. "You must drink, señorita." He trickled small amounts into her mouth, making sure she swallowed. Gradually, color began returning to her face. Her eyelids fluttered, then opened, revealing confused brown eyes that went wide with fear when they focused on his face. "Easy now," Manuel soothed, setting the tin aside. "You're safe. The wolves won't come near the fire." The girl tried to speak, but her voice cracked. He offered her another sip of broth, which she accepted with trembling hands. "My name is Manuel Hartwell," he said, keeping his voice gentle. "I found you nearly frozen. Can you tell me your name?" She swallowed hard. "Samantha," she whispered. "Samantha Mayfield." "What happened, Samantha? Where is your family?" Shame flooded her face, and tears welled in her eyes. They left me, said I was too big, too slow, eating too much of the stores." Her voice broke. "They just drove away." Manuel's jaw tightened, anger burning in his chest at such cruelty. He'd seen much in his years in the wilderness, both the beauty and brutality of nature, but the coldness of human hearts could still surprise him. "Listen to me, Samantha Mayfield," he said, his dark eyes holding hers intently. "No person is worthless before God. No one. What they did." He shook his head. "That speaks to their shame, not yours." A sob escaped her throat, and Manuel adjusted the bearskin more securely around her shoulders. Scout came to lay at their feet, adding his warmth to the fire's glow. "You won't die alone in the snow tonight," Manuel promised, his voice firm with conviction. "I give you my word." Samantha's tears fell freely now, but there was something else in her expression, a fragile spark of hope, perhaps the first she'd felt since being abandoned in the frozen forest. She huddled closer to the fire's warmth, clutching the bearskin around herself as Manuel added more wood to the flames. The wolves' howls had grown distant, moving away from the fire and human scents. Above them, stars began appearing in breaks between the pine boughs, crystal clear in the winter night. Manuel settled in to keep watch, his rifle close at hand, as Samantha drifted into an exhausted sleep beside the crackling fire. Dawn crept over the mountains, painting the snow-laden pines in shades of rose and gold. Samantha stirred beneath the bearskin cloak, her nose twitching at an unfamiliar aroma. Coffee, real coffee, bubbled in a battered pot nestled in the glowing embers of their night fire. Beside it, thin strips of venison sizzled on a flat rock, sending up wisps of fragrant smoke. Manuel crouched nearby, his weathered hands steady as he tended the breakfast. He glanced up, dark eyes warming when he saw she was awake. "Good morning, señorita. How do you feel?" Samantha pushed herself to sitting, muscles aching from the cold ground. "Alive," she whispered, surprised to find it true. "Thanks to you." He nodded, pouring steaming coffee into a tin cup. "Careful now, it's hot." His large hands dwarfed the cup as he passed it to her. "Small sips. Your body needs time to warm properly." The coffee's warmth spread through her chest, chasing away the last of winter's bite. Manuel used a knife point to lift strips of venison onto a wooden plate, offering it to her with the same patient care he'd shown all night. "Eat what you can," he said. "We have some distance to cover today." Samantha's hand trembled as she took a piece of meat. Where are we going?" "There's a hamlet about 4 hours' ride from here. Good people there, including a preacher and his wife." Manuel sipped his own coffee, studying her over the rim. "You need proper rest and care." Fear clutched at Samantha's heart. Would he leave her there, just as her family had left her here? She forced herself to eat slowly, though her stomach cramped with hunger and anxiety. After they'd eaten, Manuel efficiently packed their small camp. He led a sturdy mountain mule from where it had been tethered, adjusting its blanket and gear with practiced movements. "Come," he said, extending his hand. "I'll help you mount." Samantha hesitated, shame coloring her cheeks. I'm too heavy. The poor creature." Manuel's expression grew stern. "This is Pedro. He's carried elk carcasses through mountain passes. He's stronger than he looks." His voice softened. "Like some people I know." With gentle insistence, he helped her onto Pedro's broad back. The mule stood steady, showing no strain. Manuel gathered the reins and began leading them along a narrow trail, Scout trotting ahead through the morning mist. Frost dripped from pine boughs overhead, pattering like rain on the fresh snow. Samantha clutched the saddle horn, every step taking her further from the place where her family had abandoned her. The thought brought fresh tears, which she quickly wiped away. "I lost my Maria 7 years ago," Manuel said suddenly, his voice quiet but carrying clearly in the still morning air. "Fever took her in 3 days, despite everything we tried." He ducked under a low-hanging branch. "After that, I came up here, built a cabin, made my living trapping, hunting, cutting timber for the settlements below." Samantha listened, touched by his willingness to share such personal pain. "You've been alone all that time?" "Si, by choice." He glanced back at her, his expression grave. "But there are times when God puts someone in our path, and we must choose. Help or turn away." He turned forward again, guiding Pedro around a fallen log. "You need protection, Samantha Mayfield, and I won't leave you behind." The simple declaration brought fresh tears to her eyes, but these were different from before. These were tears of gratitude, of hope she'd thought forever lost in yesterday's snow. They traveled slowly, Manuel setting a pace that wouldn't jar her already aching body. The sun climbed higher, turning the forest into a glittering cathedral of ice-crowned trees. Scout ranged ahead and behind, occasionally barking at squirrels or other small creatures. By mid-morning, smoke from chimneys appeared through the trees. The hamlet was small, perhaps a dozen cabins clustered around a central clearing. As they approached, faces appeared in windows, and people paused in their morning tasks to stare. Samantha hunched lower on Pedro's back, all too aware of the whispers that followed their progress through the settlement. Manuel led them directly to a cabin slightly larger than the others, with a wooden cross mounted beside its door. Before Manuel could knock, the door swung open. A gray-haired man in a preacher's collar stood there, his eyes widening at the sight of them. "Manuel Hartwell," he said, "what brings you down from your mountain?" "Someone who needs help, Preacher Thompson," Manuel replied, already moving to help Samantha down from Pedro's back. Her legs buckled as they touched the ground, and Manuel swept her up in his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. More whispers rippled through the growing crowd of onlookers as Manuel carried her toward the cabin's door. Samantha buried her face against his chest, overwhelmed by shame and exhaustion. "She's half frozen and needs care," Manuel said simply, his voice brooking no argument. "Will you help?" The preacher stepped aside, holding the door wide. "Bring her in! Bring her in! Martha!" he called to someone inside. "Put water on to heat. We have a guest in need." Inside the parsonage, lamplight cast warm shadows across worn floorboards as Reverend Bishop led them into his study. The small iron stove radiated welcome heat, but his expression remained cautious as Manuel settled Samantha into a cushioned chair. "This requires explanation, Manuel Hartwell," the Reverend said, folding his hands before him. "Bringing an unknown woman to our settlement." "Found her in the snow last night," Manuel replied plainly. "Her own kin left her to die." Samantha's cheeks burned with shame as the preacher's eyes widened. "Is this true, child?" She nodded, tears threatening. "They said I was too big, too slow, a burden." Her voice caught. "They rode away while I sat in the snow." Martha Bishop, the preacher's wife, clicked her tongue in dismay as she pressed a steaming cup of tea into Samantha's hands. "Those weren't kin at all, leaving their own blood to freeze." Reverend Bishop paced before the stove, his brow furrowed. "This is a serious matter. A young woman alone, no references." He glanced at Manuel. "The town will talk." "Let them." Manuel's voice was quiet but firm. "A woman needs 3 things in this world: a roof over her head, a name to call her own, and someone who'll fight for her right to both." He turned to Samantha, his dark eyes intense. "I aim to provide all 3. Samantha's heart stuttered. "What do you mean?" "Marry us, Reverend," Manuel said. "Today, before sunset." The room fell silent save for the crackling of the stove. Samantha stared at Manuel, scarcely breathing. The preacher's wife gasped softly. "This is highly irregular," Reverend Bishop protested. "There should be proper courtship announcements." "She needs protection now," Manuel cut in, "not after weeks of gossip and speculation." "But surely the young lady should have time to consider." "I'll do it," Samantha whispered, then stronger. "I'll marry him." Manuel's eyes softened as they met hers. In them she saw not pity or duty, but something steadfast and true. He'd saved her life, treated her with dignity, and now offered her a future when she'd thought all hope lost. The Reverend sighed. "We'll need witnesses, at least." Martha hurried out, returning shortly with 2 townspeople, the general store owner and his wife. They stood awkwardly by the door, casting curious glances at Samantha. The ceremony itself was brief, conducted in the warmth of the study. Samantha's hands trembled as she stood before the Reverend, still wrapped in Manuel's bearskin cloak. Manuel's voice remained steady as he repeated the sacred vows. "A ring?" the Reverend prompted. Manuel reached into his vest pocket, producing a plain gold band. Later, Samantha would learn it had been his mother's. As he slipped it onto her finger, his calloused hands were gentle, almost reverent. "By the authority vested in me," Reverend Bishop intoned, "I now pronounce you man and wife." Outside the parsonage, the winter sun was already sliding toward the horizon. Word had spread quickly. Several townsfolk lingered nearby, watching as Manuel helped Samantha down the steps. Their whispers carried clearly in the cold air. "Married a fat cast-off." What was Hartwell thinking? Desperate times, I reckon. Samantha's shoulders hunched, her newfound joy withering under their judgment. But then Manuel's hand found hers, his grip warm and secure. "You're safe now," he murmured, just for her ears. "Nothing else matters." She straightened slightly, drawing strength from his quiet confidence. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps this was God's way of turning her tragedy into something new and precious, like the fresh snow that covered yesterday's tracks. Manuel helped her onto Pedro's back once more, but this time he swung up behind her. His arms formed a protective circle as he gathered the reins. Scout bounded ahead as they left the settlement behind, heading toward Manuel's mountain home. The last rays of sunset painted the snow-covered pines in shades of rose and gold, much like the dawn that had seemed so uncertain mere hours ago. Samantha marveled at how much had changed in a single day, from abandoned and freezing to married and protected, from nameless cast-off to Senora Hartwell. Her new husband's chest was solid and warm against her back, his breathing steady as Pedro picked his way up the familiar trail. The ring on her finger caught the fading light, a simple band that now meant everything: dignity, safety, and perhaps, in time, even love. The first rays of morning sun filtered through frost-covered windows, rousing Samantha from a deep sleep. For a moment, she lay still beneath warm quilts, disoriented by the unfamiliar scents of wood smoke and pine. Then memory rushed back: the rescue, the wedding, the long ride up mountain trails to Manuel's cabin. She sat up slowly, taking in her new home for the first time in proper daylight. The cabin was a single room, built solid from thick timber logs chinked with mud and moss. Rough-hewn beams crossed the ceiling, hung with drying pelts that cast strange shadows in the early light. An iron stove squatted in one corner, its pipe disappearing through the roof. Near it stood a simple table and 2 chairs, their wood smoothed by years of use. Manuel was already up, stoking the breakfast fire. He turned at her movement, nodding good morning. "Sleep well?" "Yes, thank you." Samantha smoothed her wrinkled dress, suddenly conscious of how out of place she must look in this bachelor's cabin. Need to show you some things, Manuel said, straightening. Can't have you freezing if I'm out hunting. Over the next hour, he taught her the rhythm of cabin life, how to bank coals overnight so the fire wouldn't die, the proper way to layer kindling and larger logs, where he kept extra wood stacked against the north wall, protected from snow by the deep eaves. Creek's just down that path, he explained, pointing through the window to a narrow trail. Good water, even in winter. Just watch your step on the ice. Samantha followed him outside, clutching a bucket. The morning air bit at her cheeks, but the view stole her breath for different reasons. The cabin perched on a gentle slope, overlooking a pristine valley carved by the creek below. Pine forests marched up the surrounding peaks, their snow-laden branches glinting in the sun. It's beautiful, she whispered. Manuel's expression softened slightly. Been my home 15 years now. Good hunting. Plenty of timber. They fetched water together, Manuel showing her where stones made natural steps down to the creek. The water ran clear and cold over rocks, singing its eternal song. Back inside, Samantha found herself settling into small tasks, sweeping the plank floor, arranging her few belongings in a wooden chest Manuel had cleared for her use. After their midday meal, Manuel pulled on his heavy coat. Need to ride into town, running low on salt and powder for hunting. He paused, studying her face. Will you be all right alone? Samantha nodded, touched by his concern. I'll be fine. There's mending to do. I noticed your shirt needs attention. He smiled slightly, the expression transforming his weathered face. Much obliged. Once Manuel had ridden away on Pedro, Samantha settled by the window with his worn shirt and her small sewing kit. The familiar task was soothing, helping her feel useful in this strange new life. Afternoon light slanted golden through the glass as she worked, the iron stove keeping the cabin cozy despite the winter chill outside. The sun was setting when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Manuel stamped snow from his boots before entering, bringing a blast of cold air with him. His expression was troubled as he hung up his coat. Something wrong? Samantha asked, setting aside the mended shirt. Manuel's jaw tightened. Railroad men in town, scouting timber rights in the valley. He moved to the stove, warming his hands. They're looking to claim what isn't theirs to take. Samantha's heart sank. Just when she'd found safety, a new threat loomed. But this is your land. Been here 15 years, Manuel agreed grimly. Built this cabin with my own hands. But railroad companies don't care about such things. They want the timber for ties and trestles. He shook his head. They'll try to push me out, same as they've done to others. Samantha twisted the gold band on her finger, anxiety churning in her stomach. Yesterday, this valley had seemed like a sanctuary after her abandonment in the snow. Now she realized even this refuge wasn't secure from the greed of powerful men. What will we do? She asked softly. Manuel turned to her, his dark eyes fierce with determination. We'll fight them. This is our home now, yours and mine. I won't let them take it. The word "our" sent a warm flutter through Samantha's chest, despite her fears. She'd gone from having no home at all to having one worth fighting for. Whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. Days passed like gentle snowfall, each one adding another layer to Samantha's new life in the mountain cabin. She found comfort in the steady rhythm of daily tasks, her hands learning the ways of frontier housekeeping. The morning sun would find her at the iron stove, stirring a pot of porridge while Manuel tended his trap lines. In the kitchen corner, she chopped vegetables with careful precision, the steady thunk of the knife against the wooden board becoming as familiar as her own heartbeat. Root cellar carrots and potatoes went into the evening stew, along with whatever game Manuel brought home. His hound, Bear, would watch her work from his place by the fire, thumping his tail whenever she spoke to him. There you go, old fellow, Samantha said softly, setting down his bowl of scraps. The dog's gentle brown eyes reminded her of Manuel's, watchful but kind. Manuel noticed her growing confidence with the daily chores. One evening, as she returned from checking the nearest snares, he nodded approvingly at the pair of rabbits she carried. "You've got a good eye for the traps," he said, helping her clean the catch. "Steady hands, too." Samantha felt warmth spread through her chest at the praise. "I want to do my part." "You do more than that," Manuel replied, his voice gruff but sincere. "Your worth ain't in your size, Samantha. It's in here." He tapped his chest. "In the care you take with everything you do." Those words stayed with her, warming her heart like banked coals through the cold mountain nights. They came back to her one afternoon as she organized the cabin's sparse storage space, trying to make room for the dried herbs she'd begun collecting. In the back corner of a high shelf, her fingers brushed against something solid, an old wooden trunk, its surface dulled by years of dust. Curious, she carefully lifted it down. The lid creaked as she opened it, revealing a stack of yellowed papers and documents. Settling by the window for better light, Samantha began to examine them. Her reading was slow but determined, each word carefully sounded out as she'd learned in her brief schooling. Most were deeds and survey maps, but one document caught her eye, a formal letter written in precise handwriting. As she read, her heart began to pound. The letter detailed a treaty agreement, signed decades ago, granting the valley lands to several Ute families. The document was official, bearing government seals and signatures. This valley had never been open for settlement. It legally belonged to the native people who had lived here first. When Manuel returned from cutting timber, she was still sitting by the window, the letter clutched in her trembling hands. "Manuel," she called, her voice urgent. "I found something you need to see." He crossed to her, brow furrowed at her tone. Taking the letter, he read silently, his expression growing grave. "This changes everything," Samantha said softly. "The railroad can't claim land that was never rightfully available. We have to show this to someone, the town lawyer, or—" "No." Manuel's voice was sharp. He ran a hand through his dark hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. "Railroad men don't care about treaties. They'll bring guns, not lawyers. Showing this could bring violence down on all our heads." Samantha stood, gathering her courage. "But the truth matters. These families had rights to this land before any of us. How can we stay silent knowing that—" Manuel turned to look at her, really look at her, as if seeing something new in her face. Gone was the trembling girl he'd found in the snow. In her place stood a woman of conviction, her eyes bright with purpose. "You're right," he said finally, his voice softening. "Truth does matter, but we need to be smart about how we use it." He looked down at the letter again. "This could help us stop them, if we can find the right way." Samantha stepped closer, touching his arm gently. "Then we'll find it. Together." Manuel covered her hand with his own, rough calluses against her soft skin. The respect in his gaze made her stand taller, helping her see herself as he did, not as the burden her family had cast aside, but as someone whose strength went far deeper than the physical. The letter lay between them on the table, its faded ink holding the power to change not just their lives, but the fate of the entire valley. Outside, the winter wind whispered through pine boughs, carrying the weight of secrets long buried beneath the snow. The Sunday morning dawned clear and cold, frost glittering on the cabin windows like scattered diamonds. Samantha smoothed her best dress, one of two she owned, and pinned her hair carefully. Her fingers trembled slightly as she fastened the last button. This would be her first time attending church as Manuel's wife. "Ready?" Manuel asked, standing by the door in his pressed shirt and dark coat. His gentle smile steadied her nerves. The wagon ride into town was quiet, broken only by the creak of wheels and the soft snort of horses. As they approached the white-painted church, Samantha could see clusters of townspeople gathering on the steps, their heads turning to watch the approaching wagon. The whispers started as soon as they stepped down. Samantha caught fragments as they walked toward the church doors. That's the fat bride Manuel Hartwell took in. Found her in the snow, they say. Wonder how long before he regrets it. Manuel's hand tightened on her arm, but Samantha lifted her chin and walked forward. She had endured worse than whispers. The memory of that frozen night when her family abandoned her still burned, but it had forged something stronger in her soul. They settled into a pew near the back, and Samantha focused on the sermon, letting the minister's words about mercy and grace wash over her. Manuel's solid presence beside her felt like an anchor in stormy waters. As the congregation filed out after the service, a commotion near the church steps caught everyone's attention. Little Sarah Miller, the blacksmith's daughter, had collapsed, her face flushed with fever. "She's burning up!" Mrs. Miller cried, cradling her daughter. Samantha pushed through the crowd, her heart racing as she recognized the telltale signs, the labored breathing, the gray patches in the child's throat visible when she coughed. "It's diphtheria," Samantha said quietly. "I've seen it before." The townspeople drew back in fear, but Samantha knelt beside the child. "I know some remedies that might help," she offered. "My grandmother taught me." Mrs. Miller looked desperately between Samantha and her husband. Mr. Miller nodded grimly. "We'll try anything." In the Miller's kitchen, Samantha worked quickly, directing Manuel to fetch supplies from their wagon. She set water to boil and prepared a mustard poultice, her movements sure and practiced. Hours passed as she tended to Sarah, spooning warm broth between the girl's cracked lips and changing the poultices regularly. "The mustard draws out the fever," she explained softly to Mrs. Miller, who watched with worried eyes. "And the broth gives strength." Through the long afternoon and into evening, Samantha stayed by Sarah's bedside. She sang quiet hymns and dabbed the child's forehead with cool cloths. Gradually, the girl's breathing eased and her fever began to break. The neighbors who had gathered to help or offer prayers watched Samantha with growing respect. The same women who had whispered behind their hands that morning now brought her tea and offered to spell her at Sarah's bedside. "You have a healer's touch," Mrs. Peterson said, pressing Samantha's hand. "We're blessed to have you in our community." As the sun set, Sarah's fever finally broke. The little girl opened her eyes and managed a weak smile. Mrs. Miller burst into tears of relief, hugging Samantha tightly. "How can we ever thank you?" she sobbed. "No thanks needed," Samantha replied, her own eyes moist. "We're neighbors. This is what neighbors do." The ride home was quiet, but different from the morning's tense silence. Manuel kept glancing at his wife, pride evident in his dark eyes. "You showed real courage today," he said as they reached the cabin. "Real love, too." Inside, they lit the lamps and settled at their rough-hewn table. Manuel reached for Samantha's hand as they bowed their heads to pray. Their familiar evening ritual felt deeper somehow, filled with new meaning. "Thank you, Lord," Manuel began, his voice rough with emotion, "for bringing this good woman into my life." "And thank you," Samantha added, "for giving me a true home at last." When they raised their heads, both were smiling through tears. Manuel's laugh broke the solemnity, and soon Samantha joined in, their joy echoing off the cabin walls. The sound of their shared laughter seemed to chase away the last shadows of her past pain, replacing them with the warm light of belonging. Outside, the evening star rose over the valley, bright and steady as hope itself. Inside the cabin, Samantha and Manuel's grateful prayers mingled with their laughter, blessing their simple home with the richest gifts of all: love, purpose, and the knowledge that sometimes the greatest healing comes through helping others. December rolled into the valley like a white blanket, draping the pines in crystalline silence. Each morning, frost etched delicate patterns on the cabin windows, and smoke curled from the chimney into the pearl-gray sky. Inside, Samantha stirred a pot of coffee while Manuel pulled on his heavy boots. "Storm's coming," he said, nodding toward the laden clouds. "Best get more wood split before it hits." Together they worked in the crisp morning air. Manuel's axe rang against the logs while Samantha stacked the split pieces. Her cheeks grew rosy with effort, but she no longer tired as easily as she had those first weeks. Months of honest work had strengthened her body and spirit alike. "You're getting mighty quick with that stacking," Manuel observed, pausing to wipe his brow. His eyes crinkled with warmth as he watched her work. "Had plenty of practice now," she replied, smiling, "though I never thought I'd be grateful for such hard work." They carried armloads to the cabin, building the woodpile high against the wall. In the barn, Manuel showed Samantha how to insulate the walls with extra straw, explaining how the animal's body heat would help keep the space warm. "Horses and mules are smart about weather," he said, patting his faithful mule's neck. "They'll huddle together when the cold bites deep." As evening drew in, they sealed themselves inside the cabin's snug warmth. Manuel stoked the fire while Samantha set out bowls of hearty stew. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls as they settled into their chairs. "Tell me about the mountains," Samantha requested, wrapping her hands around her cup. She loved hearing his stories of life in the wild places. Manuel's voice grew rich with memory. "There's passes up there where the wind speaks in whispers. Set my trap lines in summer, checking them through first snow. Learned every creek and hollow." He paused, adding softly, "Was lonely work, though. Didn't know how lonely until now." Samantha reached across the table, touching his weathered hand. Such gestures came easier now, natural as breathing. "I was lonely too," she confessed, "even surrounded by family who never saw me." "I see you," Manuel said simply, his fingers curling around hers. She told him then about her childhood dreams, of a home where she truly belonged, of being valued for her heart rather than judged by her size. "I used to imagine someone would look at me and see something worth keeping," she whispered. Manuel's grip tightened. "You're worth everything," he said, voice rough with feeling. Their quiet evening was interrupted by the sound of hooves on the packed snow outside. Manuel rose, hand going to his rifle, but it was only Ben Potter from town, looking troubled. "Railroad men were in the saloon today," he reported, stamping snow from his boots, offering cash for folks to sign papers supporting their claim to the valley. Samantha's heart sank as Ben continued. "Some are tempted, Manuel. Times are hard, and they're promising jobs once the timber operation starts." "This valley ain't theirs to take," Manuel said firmly. "We've got proof of the Ute claims." "They don't care about proof," Ben warned. "They've got money and lawyers. Just wanted you to know, they were asking particular questions about your place." After Ben left, the cabin felt colder despite the blazing fire. Manuel and Samantha sat close together, the treaty letter spread before them on the table, its faded ink a fragile defense against corporate greed. Near midnight, they were startled awake by frantic braying from the barn. Manuel grabbed his rifle and lantern, while Samantha clutched her shawl around her shoulders in the doorway. The mule was kicking its stall, eyes rolling white in the darkness. "Something spooked him proper," Manuel muttered, lifting the lantern higher. Its light caught something pale fluttering on the cabin door, a piece of paper nailed crude and threatening in the night. Manuel tore it free, holding it close to the flame. Samantha pressed against his arm, reading the words that made her blood run cold. "Sell or burn." "They mean to drive us out," she whispered. "Been threatened before," Manuel said grimly. "Won't work now either." Back inside, they added extra logs to the fire, neither willing to sleep just yet. The note lay on the table between them, its message stark as the winter night beyond their walls. Samantha reached for Manuel's hand, drawing strength from his steady presence. "We'll face it together," she said firmly. "Whatever comes." Manuel squeezed her fingers, his face softened by firelight and affection. Together, he agreed, and in that word lay all the belonging Samantha had ever dreamed of finding. They sat awake long into the night, watching the flames dance and listening to the wind's lonely song through the pines. The threat might be real, but so was their determination to protect their home and the love that had transformed it from mere shelter into something sacred. 2 nights after the threatening note appeared, the winter storm that had been threatening all week finally descended upon the valley. Wind howled through the pines, driving snow against the cabin windows in angry gusts. Manuel and Samantha huddled close to the fire, trying to ignore the storm's fury. The peaceful evening shattered when their dog began barking frantically. Through the frosted window, an orange glow painted the swirling snow. Manuel's face went pale. "The barn!" Samantha cried out, already reaching for her coat. They burst into the storm, snow stinging their faces. Flames licked up the barn's wooden walls, casting demonic shadows across the white ground. The horses whinnied in terror inside. "The animals!" Manuel shouted above the wind. He ran for the barn doors while Samantha snatched up the water bucket. But the well was frozen solid. "Use snow!" Manuel yelled, emerging from the smoke with the terrified horses. He had managed to free them from their stalls, and they bolted into the darkness. Samantha scooped up handfuls of snow, flinging them at the flames, but the heat merely turned the snow to useless steam. Manuel joined her, both of them desperately hurling snow at the inferno, but it was like trying to douse a bonfire with dewdrops. The roof groaned. "Get back!" Manuel grabbed Samantha's arm and pulled her away just as burning timbers crashed down. Sparks exploded into the night sky, carried on the wind like furious fireflies. The heat seared their faces as they watched helplessly. The barn collapsed in on itself with a thunderous roar, sending up a fresh cloud of sparks and smoke. All their hay for winter, Manuel's tools, the wagon they'd been fixing, everything inside was lost to the flames. Samantha clutched Manuel's arm, tears freezing on her cheeks. Who would do such a thing? Manuel's jaw clenched. "We both know who." His voice was as cold as the storm around them. The next morning, Manuel rode into town despite Samantha's protests. His face was set in grim lines as he mounted his horse. "Don't do anything rash!" she pleaded, but the wind carried her words away as he rode off. Unable to sit and wait, Samantha hitched up her skirts and followed on foot through the freshly fallen snow. Her heart pounded with each step. By the time she reached town, a crowd had gathered outside the saloon. She heard the commotion before she saw it, the sound of fists striking flesh, furniture splintering. Pushing through the onlookers, she saw Manuel confronting 3 railroad men, his fury evident in every line of his body. "You burned my barn!" he shouted, landing a solid punch that sent one man staggering. But they were 3 against 1. While Manuel grappled with the first man, another caught him from behind. The third struck him hard in the ribs. Samantha heard the sickening crack even from where she stood. "Stop it!" she screamed, trying to push forward. "Someone help him!" Manuel struggled to stay on his feet, blood streaming from his nose. One of the railroad men struck him again, and he stumbled backward into the snow. They didn't stop. Boots swung at his ribs as he curled in on himself. "Help!" Samantha's voice rose above the murmuring crowd. "Please, somebody help him!" Finally, several townsmen rushed forward to pull the railroad men away. Samantha ran to Manuel, falling to her knees beside him in the blood-stained snow. His face was a mess of cuts and bruises, and each breath seemed to cause him pain. "Get Doc Miller!" someone shouted. 2 neighbors, Ben Potter and old Mr. Jenkins, carefully lifted Manuel between them. Samantha followed as they carried him to the doctor's house, her hands shaking as she opened doors. In the doctor's back room, they laid Manuel on a narrow bed. His eyes were swollen nearly shut, and he groaned when Doc Miller pressed gentle fingers against his ribs. 3 broken ribs at least, the doctor announced grimly. "Might be internal bleeding. He'll need watching." Samantha sank into a chair beside the bed, taking Manuel's battered hand in hers. She felt so small, so powerless against the forces aligned against them. The railroad men had burned their barn, beaten her husband, and would likely face no consequences for either action. But as she watched Manuel's labored breathing, something hardened inside her. She might be just one woman, might be the person everyone had always dismissed as too big, too slow, too much of a burden. But she refused to give in to despair. Manuel had saved her life in the snow, had given her a home and purpose when her own family cast her aside. Now it was her turn to fight for him, for their land, for everything they had built together. She squeezed Manuel's hand gently, mindful of his injuries. His fingers twitched in response, and his swollen eyes cracked open slightly. "Rest," she whispered, touching his bruised cheek with tender fingers. "I'm here. I won't leave you." He tried to speak, but she shushed him softly. Outside the window, snow continued to fall, and somewhere in the valley their frightened horses roamed free. But right now, all that mattered was helping Manuel heal and finding a way to save their home that didn't end in violence. Samantha sat beside Manuel's bed in Doc Miller's back room as afternoon light faded to dusk. The doctor had wrapped Manuel's ribs tight with linen bandages and applied witch hazel to his bruises, but pain still etched deep lines around his eyes. Her heart ached watching him struggle for each breath. She dipped a cloth in cool water and dabbed his split lips. "You need to eat something," she murmured, reaching for the pot of chicken broth she'd kept warming on the doctor's small stove. Manuel tried to shake his head, but winced at the movement. "Can't," he whispered. "Just a little," Samantha insisted, filling a spoon. "Please, for me." He allowed her to feed him several spoonfuls, though each swallow seemed to pain him. Between sips, his good eye fixed on her face with urgent intensity. "The letter," he managed to say. "You must hide it. Keep it safe." "Don't worry about that now," she soothed, but he grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. "Promise me." His voice was rough. "Railroad men, they'll search the cabin. That letter, our only proof." Samantha nodded, understanding the gravity of his words. "I promise. Now rest." As night settled over the doctor's house, she pulled her chair closer to Manuel's bedside. The letter weighed heavy in her thoughts. It was their only evidence that the railroad's claims were false, that the valley legally belonged to the Ute people through treaty. Without it, there would be no stopping the railroad from taking everything. Sleep refused to come. Instead, memories of that terrible winter morning flooded back, her family's wagons disappearing into the snowy forest, leaving her alone to die. The crushing weight of abandonment pressed on her chest, just as heavy now as it had then. But Manuel had found her, had saved her, had given her a home and purpose when everyone else saw her as worthless. As midnight passed, Samantha watched shadows dance across the ceiling. She could not sit idle while others determined their fate. Manuel had rescued her. Now it was her turn to fight for him, for their home, for justice. The answer crystallized in her mind with startling clarity. She must take the treaty letter to the Ute camp herself. They needed to know their rights were being violated before the railroad destroyed everything. Dawn painted the eastern sky in pale gold as Samantha slipped home to retrieve the letter. Her hands trembled as she folded the precious document and tucked it securely in her bodice, close to her heart. The cabin felt empty without Manuel's steady presence. In the barn's charred remains, she found Manuel's old saddle miraculously intact beneath fallen timbers. Their mule had returned in the night, drawn by familiar territory. Samantha whispered thanks to God for this small mercy as she carefully fitted the saddle. Snow had begun falling again, thick flakes swirling in the strengthening wind. Samantha knew the Ute winter camp lay beyond Pine Ridge, a half-day's ride in good weather. In this storm, the journey would be treacherous. She paused before mounting, pressed her hand to where the letter rested against her chest, and bowed her head in prayer. "Lord," she whispered, "give me courage. Show me the way. Help me do what's right." The mule's hooves crunched through fresh powder as Samantha guided him toward the ridge trail. Wind whipped at her cloak, driving needles of snow against her face. She tucked her chin down and pressed forward. Memories of Manuel's strength fortified her resolve. He had not hesitated to help her when she was lost and alone. Now she would be equally brave for him. The trail grew steeper, harder to follow as snow accumulated. Pine boughs hung heavy with white, occasionally dumping their frozen burden with sharp cracks that made the mule's ears twitch nervously. Samantha kept one hand on the letter's outline beneath her clothes, making sure it stayed safe and dry. She thought of Manuel lying injured in town, of their burned barn, of the railroad men's sneering faces. For too long, she had believed herself powerless, the burden her family had named her. But Manuel had shown her different truth, that worth came from courage and compassion, not from fitting others' expectations. Now she would prove it. Through wind and snow, through fear and doubt, she would carry this message of justice to those who needed to hear it. The girl abandoned in winter's heart had found her strength at last. Samantha urged the mule higher up the ridge as the storm intensified around them. Somewhere ahead, beyond the curtain of white, lay the Ute camp, and with it, hope for saving their valley home. The wind howled like a wounded beast as Samantha guided the mule through deepening snow. Pine branches cracked overhead, dumping heavy loads that made her mount shy and stumble. Her fingers, stiff inside wool mittens, could barely grip the reins. "Lead me, O Lord," she whispered, squinting against the whiteout. The familiar words of amazing grace passed her frozen lips, giving her courage as visibility dropped to mere feet ahead. A steep ravine appeared suddenly through the snow curtain. The mule balked, hooves sliding on icy rock. Samantha's heart hammered as she carefully dismounted, leading him step by step down the treacherous slope. At the bottom, an angry creek churned with dark water and ice chunks. She tested the ford with a branch, finding the water deeper than expected. But turning back wasn't an option. Not with Manuel hurt, not with justice waiting. Taking a deep breath, she led the mule into the frigid current. The shock of cold stole her breath as water surged past her knees. Ice chunks battered her legs while the mule snorted in protest. Halfway across, her foot slipped on a smooth stone. She stumbled, gasping as icy water soaked her skirts. Only a desperate grab for the mule's harness kept her from being swept downstream. "Just a little further," she encouraged both herself and the animal, though her teeth chattered violently. They emerged on the far bank, her sodden clothes immediately beginning to freeze. As afternoon light faded, new sounds echoed through the forest, the mournful howls of wolves. The mule's ears pinned back, his steps quickening. Samantha's fingers fumbled at her waist, checking that Manuel's old pistol was still secure, though she prayed she wouldn't need it. The howls grew closer. Through the trees, she caught glimpses of gray shapes pacing parallel to their path. The mule snorted, trying to break into a dangerous gallop on the slick ground. Samantha held him steady, her voice cracking as she sang hymns louder to ward off panic. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound." The wolves drew nearer, emboldened by darkness and the scent of fear. "That saved a wretch like me." A large male appeared directly ahead, yellow eyes gleaming. The mule reared. Samantha clung to the saddle, heart pounding. Just as she reached for the pistol, a distant drum echoed through the trees. The wolf's ears pricked up, and after a tense moment, he melted back into the shadows. His pack followed, their howls fading into the gathering night. Samantha sagged in relief, realizing the drums meant the Ute camp must be near. Sure enough, the trees soon thinned, revealing the glow of fires through the snow. Her strength finally failed as the mule stumbled into the firelight. She slid from the saddle, her frozen legs buckling. Strong hands caught her before she hit the ground. Through blurred vision, she saw concerned faces gathering around. Women wrapped her in warm blankets, while men led the exhausted mule to shelter. "Please," she managed through chattering teeth. "I must speak with Chief Tawa." The railroad. Our valley. An elder woman spoke rapid Ute, and several young men hurried toward a large lodge. Samantha was helped closer to the fire, given hot tea that burned gloriously down her throat. Her fingers trembled as she reached into her bodice, relief flooding through her as she felt the letter was still dry and intact. Chief Tawa emerged from his lodge, his stern face softening with concern at her condition. He sat beside her at the fire, waiting patiently while she gathered her strength to speak. "The railroad men," she explained, her voice hoarse. "They're trying to steal the valley. They burned our barn, beat my husband, but we found this." She carefully withdrew the letter, handling it like the precious thing it was. "It proves the land is yours by treaty. They have no right to take it." The chief took the document carefully, studying it in the firelight. Other elders gathered close, murmuring as they recognized the official seals and signatures. Tawa's expression grew grave as he read, then looked up at Samantha with new respect in his eyes. "You risked much to bring this to us," he said in careful English. "Your heart is strong, like the mountain oak that bends but does not break." "Will you help us stop them?" Samantha asked, clutching the blanket tighter. "They must be shown they cannot simply take what they want." Chief Tawa nodded slowly. "This paper speaks truth we have always known. Tomorrow, when light returns, we will ride with you to town. The railroad men must learn that treaties are not empty words to be ignored when gold blinds their eyes." Samantha felt tears of relief freeze on her cheeks. The chief reached out and clasped her hand firmly. "Rest now, brave one," he said. "You have done what needed doing. Tomorrow we will stand together for justice." Dawn painted the eastern sky in streaks of rose and gold as Samantha led the Ute riders down the snow-covered ridge toward town. Frost sparkled on pine boughs, and their horses' breath clouded in the crisp morning air. Behind her rode Chief Tawa and 11 of his strongest warriors, their faces stern with purpose. The crunch of hooves on crusty snow drew townsfolk from their homes and businesses. Women paused in sweeping their porches, men stopped chopping wood, and children pressed faces against frosted window panes. Whispers rippled through the gathering crowd as Samantha guided her mule down the main street, her back straight despite her exhaustion. Outside the doctor's house, the door creaked open. Manuel emerged, one arm wrapped protectively around his broken ribs, his face still mottled with bruises. His eyes widened at the sight of his wife leading the Ute delegation. Pride and worry warred across his features as he limped down the steps. "Samantha?" His voice was rough with emotion. "I feared—" He trailed off, reaching for her hand as she dismounted. She squeezed his fingers gently. "The Lord protected me, Manuel. And now we'll protect what's right." More townspeople gathered as Samantha and the Ute riders dismounted. Chief Tawa stood tall beside her, the treaty letter secure in his beaded leather pouch. The railroad men emerged from the hotel, their faces darkening at the sight of the native delegation. Reverend Bishop hurried forward, his collar askew. "The meeting hall," he suggested, gesturing to the white-painted building. "This should be discussed properly, under God's roof." People filed into the hall, boots stamping snow from their soles. Wooden benches creaked under the weight of curious townsfolk. The railroad men claimed the front row, their fancy coats and watches standing out among the simple dress of the mountain community. Samantha stood before them all, her hands clasped to still their trembling. Manuel moved to stand beside her, his quiet strength bolstering her courage. The morning light streamed through high windows, catching dust motes in its beams. "I know what it means to be cast aside," Samantha began, her voice growing stronger with each word. "To be deemed worthless by those who should love you. My own family left me to die in the snow. Not 3 months past." A murmur ran through the crowd. Several women who had whispered about her size now looked down, shamefaced. "But if a family leaves you for dead," she continued, her voice ringing with conviction, "God himself will raise up a new one. He sent Manuel to save me. He gave me this valley and its people, and he showed me this truth, that justice matters more than profit." Chief Tawa stepped forward, withdrawing the treaty letter. He spoke in careful English, explaining how the document proved the valley lands belonged to his people through sacred agreement. The railroad men shifted uncomfortably as he read the terms aloud, their earlier arrogance crumbling. "You burned our barn," Samantha declared, facing the railroad men directly. "You beat my husband. You thought to take by force what was never yours to claim. But God's truth cannot be buried in snow or burned away." The lead railroad man stood, his face flushed. "This is absurd. A woman and a bunch of Indians can't—" "Can't what?" Manuel interrupted, his quiet voice carrying dangerous weight. "Can't defend their homes? Can't speak truth?" He took Samantha's hand. "My wife risked her life to carry justice through the storm, while you hired thugs to threaten honest folk." Reverend Bishop examined the treaty carefully, then stood. "This document is legitimate, bearing the governor's seal. The railroad has no legal claim here." The railroad men huddled together, whispering furiously. Finally, their leader turned back, forcing a tight smile. "Perhaps we were. Hasty in our plans. We'll seek timber rights elsewhere." A cheer erupted through the hall. Neighbors who had once shunned Samantha now pressed forward to shake her hand. The doctor's wife hugged her, tears in her eyes. "You showed us all what courage means, dear," she whispered. Chief Tawa clasped hands with Manuel, then turned to Samantha. "You have honored the truth," he said. "Our peoples will remember this day." The railroad men slunk from the hall, their schemes undone by a woman they had dismissed as worthless. Samantha felt tears of joy and exhaustion sliding down her cheeks as Manuel wrapped his arm around her shoulders. The townspeople gathered closer, offering apologies, congratulations, and promises of help rebuilding the barn. Their words of respect washed over Samantha like a healing balm, replacing old hurts with new hope. Through the windows, the morning sun blazed bright on fresh snow, promising a new day for the valley and all who called it home. The valley rang with the sound of hammers in the days that followed. Neighbors arrived at dawn, carrying tools and determination. Even those who had once whispered about the fat bride now sought Samantha's guidance, impressed by her courage against the railroad men. Ute riders appeared through the morning mist, leading pack horses laden with fresh-cut timber. Their strong hands made quick work of raising the barn's frame against the winter sky. Children darted between workers, proudly offering nails and bits of lumber they had gathered from their family's woodsheds. Manuel sat on the porch, forced to rest his healing ribs. His dark eyes followed Samantha as she moved through the crowd, directing where beams should go and ensuring everyone had hot coffee. She had tied her hair back with a faded ribbon, her cheeks pink from the cold and exertion. When she caught him watching, her smile warmed him more than the winter sun. "Your wife has the heart of a leader," Chief Tawa observed, pausing beside Manuel's chair. "She sees what needs doing and brings people together." Manuel nodded, pride swelling in his chest. She was meant for more than what her family saw in her. By sunset, the new barn stood strong against the mountain winds, larger than the old one. Neighbors departed with warm handshakes and promises to return tomorrow. As darkness fell, snow began drifting down in lazy spirals. Inside their cabin, Samantha stoked the fire while Manuel settled into his chair with a groan. She brought him a cup of willow bark tea for his pain, then sat beside him on the hearth. The firelight played across her features as she leaned against his shoulder. "You saved more than the land," Manuel said softly, his accent thick with emotion. "When my Isabella died, I thought my heart died too. I married you to give you protection, but you gave me back my faith. In God, in love, in justice." Samantha lifted her face to his, tears shining in her eyes. Manuel cupped her cheek with a calloused hand, and for the first time, he bent to kiss her, not as a duty or a kindness, but as a husband truly in love with his wife. The fire crackled softly as their lips met, sealing a bond that had grown from convenience into something sacred and true. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing their valley in peaceful white. Spring sunbeams danced through the log church's windows, casting golden ribbons across the worn floorboards. The congregation filled every pew, their Sunday best brightened by morning light. At the simple altar, Manuel and Samantha knelt together, their hands clasped tight. Reverend Bishop's voice carried clear and strong through the hushed sanctuary. "What God has joined, let no man put asunder. Today these two souls recommit their vows, not in haste or necessity, but in the fullness of love." Manuel's voice was steady as he spoke, his Spanish accent lending music to the familiar words. "I take thee, Samantha, as my beloved wife." His dark eyes held hers, remembering that snowy night when he'd first found her beneath the pine tree. Tears sparkled on Samantha's cheeks as she responded, her voice clear and confident, so different from the trembling girl who'd first whispered these vows months ago. "I take thee, Manuel, as my beloved husband." From their seats, Chief Tawa and the Ute elders nodded with dignity, their presence a testament to bridges built and justice served. The townspeople who had once whispered cruel words now beamed with genuine warmth, transformed by witnessing Samantha's courage and grace. After the service, Manuel and Samantha walked the path home, their fingers intertwined. The spring breeze carried the scent of wild roses and fresh-cut hay. Their rebuilt barn stood proud against the blue sky, while smoke curled peacefully from their cabin's chimney. Pausing at their gate, Samantha gazed at the home they'd defended together, at the garden she'd planted, the new barn raised by neighbors' hands, the valley protected by truth and unity. She squeezed Manuel's hand and whispered a prayer of thanksgiving. Here, where she'd once feared abandonment, she had found belonging. Here, God had turned her mourning into dancing, giving her a family bound by love rather than blood. Thanks for tuning in. These stories remind us that life is more than headlines. It's about heartlines. Subscribe if you want more moments that make you pause, feel, and reflect.